No healer could calm the Alpha King's dying wolf as the rejected Omega touched him and stopped his rage. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Elena Moore had learned how to be invisible long before the moon ever learned her name. And tonight that skill was the only reason she stood unnoticed at the edge of the stone hall, where the air felt heavy, warm, and restless, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She was a rejected Omega, the kind people forgot to count when they spoke of strength, the kind they remembered only when something went wrong. The great hall was wide enough to fit a farmhouse end to end, its ceiling rising higher than a two-story home, lit by steady torchlight that reflected off pale stone and polished metal. But Elena felt small within it, like a whisper in a crowded room. Everyone's attention was fixed on the center, where the Alpha King's presence filled the space even without movement, a pressure more felt than seen, like standing too close to a powerful engine. He had been calm once, they said, a leader whose voice could steady 100 wolves with a single word, but something inside him had been failing for days, and nothing anyone tried had helped. Skilled healers had come and gone, confident at first, quiet when they left, their certainty fading one by one, until the hall felt less like a place of hope and more like a waiting room for bad news. Elena listened to the murmurs ripple through the crowd, words like impossible and unstoppable passing from mouth to mouth, and each time she heard them, her chest tightened, not with fear, but with a strange pull she didn't understand yet. She kept her hands folded, fingers pressed together to stop them from shaking, and focused on the small, familiar things, the smoothness of the stone floor beneath her boots, the faint scent of pine that reminded her of mornings she used to love, before she was labeled and set aside. No one had asked her to be there for any important reason. She was present because someone needed an extra pair of eyes, an extra body in case errands were required, nothing more. And yet, as the Alpha King drew a slow breath and the sound carried across the room, something answered inside her, quiet but firm, like a hand knocking from the other side of a door she hadn't known existed. She didn't know what it meant, only that for the first time in a long while, she felt seen by something deeper than the crowd, deeper than titles or rank. Elena lifted her gaze, just slightly, and in that moment, with the hall hushed and the air trembling with anticipation, the rejected Omega took her first step toward a destiny no one else had been able to reach. Elena did not know when the decision formed, only that it settled inside her with the same quiet certainty as gravity, and before she could overthink it, her feet carried her forward, one careful step at a time, across the cold stone floor toward the center of the hall. The whispers softened as she moved, curiosity replacing dismissal, because no one expected the rejected Omega to approach the one presence everyone else feared to disturb. The Alpha King remained still, seated but tense, as if holding himself together required constant effort, and the space around him felt charged, like the air before a summer storm breaks. Elena stopped several feet away, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, not harsh or burning, but intense, like standing too near a fireplace on a winter night. She could sense the strain beneath it, the exhaustion, the ache of something pushed too far for too long, and it made her swallow hard, not from fear, but from recognition. She had known that kind of pressure, the kind that came from being told to endure without complaint. Around them, the healers stood back, their expressions tight, hands clasped in front of them as if bracing for disappointment yet again. No one spoke to Elena, no one guided her, and that silence felt heavier than any command. She drew a slow breath, grounding herself the way she had learned to do when the world felt too loud, counting the rise and fall of her chest, listening past the noise to what felt true. The Alpha King's eyes lifted then, just slightly, and for an instant, their gazes met. There was no anger there, no command, only a flicker of awareness, sharp and searching, as if he sensed her before understanding why. Elena felt it like a tug beneath her ribs, gentle but insistent, urging her not to retreat. She raised her hand without thinking, stopping midway as doubt flickered through her mind. Memories of being told she was not enough, that she should stay back, stay quiet, stay out of the way. The hall seemed to wait with her, every breath held, every sound suspended, and in that pause, she made her choice. Elena stepped closer and placed her palm against his chest, just above where she sensed the strain gathered most tightly, and the contact was simple, steady, unforced. She did not speak spells or recite prayers, because she knew none that applied to this moment. Instead, she focused on the rhythm beneath her hand, slow and uneven, and let herself feel it fully, without fear or judgment. Something shifted then, subtle but undeniable, like a knot loosening after being pulled too tight for too long. The tension in the air eased, just enough to be noticed, and a soft exhale passed the Alpha King's lips, deeper than the breaths he had taken before. Elena remained where she was, her hand warm against him, her posture calm, as if reassuring not only him, but herself, that she belonged in this space. Around them, the watchers leaned in without realizing it, sensing the change before they understood it, and for the first time since she entered the hall, Elena did not feel invisible. She felt present, anchored, as if something ancient and patient had finally recognized her and chosen to listen. The change did not arrive like thunder or light, but like a tide quietly turning, noticeable only if you were paying attention, and Elena felt it first through her palm, the steadying rhythm beneath her hand smoothing into something calmer, more even, as if a storm had finally found its shoreline. The Alpha King's shoulders lowered by a fraction, subtle enough that most would miss it, yet unmistakable to someone attuned to the language of breath and tension, and Elena remained still, careful not to rush what felt fragile and important. Around them, the hall exhaled with her, the tight silence loosening into a cautious murmur as the watchers sensed that something was different, something they had not planned for. The healers exchanged glances, their brows furrowed not in failure this time, but in quiet disbelief, because nothing in their training explained what they were witnessing. Elena did not pull away when the Alpha King shifted his focus fully to her, his gaze steady now, clearer, as if the noise inside him had dimmed enough for recognition to take hold. There was curiosity there, and a question he did not yet ask, and Elena met it with calm she did not know she possessed, grounded by the simple truth of her presence. She listened to the rhythm beneath her hand, allowing it to guide her breathing, and with each slow inhale and exhale, the space between them felt less charged and more balanced, like a scale finding its center. Someone near the edge of the hall whispered her name, surprised, uncertain, and the sound carried just enough to remind Elena of who she was to them. The rejected Omega, the one without rank or expectation. The thought flickered through her mind, but it did not root there, because the Alpha King's attention anchored her, steady and intent, and for the first time, she understood that power was not always loud. He shifted again, carefully this time, as if testing the ground beneath his feet, and the movement drew a collective intake of breath from the crowd, but nothing broke, nothing surged out of control. Instead, the Alpha King placed his hand over hers, not gripping, not restraining, simply acknowledging the connection that had formed without permission or explanation. The contact sent a warm, grounding sensation through Elena's arm, not overwhelming, just present, and she did not retreat. She sensed gratitude there, mixed with confusion, and beneath it all, a deep, worn fatigue that spoke of responsibility carried too long without rest. The hall felt brighter somehow, though the torches burned the same as before, and the stone walls seemed less imposing as the Alpha King drew another steady breath, and then another, each one easier than the last. The murmurs grew louder, no longer fearful, but questioning, wondering what this meant for a ruler everyone believed unstoppable and untouchable. Elena lowered her gaze slightly, not in submission, but in respect, maintaining the contact while allowing him space to find his balance. When she finally eased her hand away, the Alpha King did not recoil or tense, and that alone felt like a quiet miracle. He remained calm, present, and unmistakably aware, and as he straightened, the hall recognized it too, a collective understanding rippling outward that something had shifted in ways they could not undo. Elena stepped back then, her heart steady, her posture composed, and though she felt the weight of every eye upon her, she did not shrink. For the first time since she could remember, the rejected Omega stood at the center of the hall not as an afterthought, but as the reason the storm had passed. The hall did not erupt into celebration or panic, but into something far more uncertain, a low current of realization moving from wolf to wolf as they tried to understand what they had just witnessed and what it meant for the balance they relied on. Elena felt the weight of that attention immediately, 1,000 unspoken questions pressing against her skin, and she kept her posture steady, her chin level, reminding herself that nothing she had done came from defiance or ambition. The Alpha King turned fully now, rising with deliberate control, his movements measured and grounded, and the absence of strain in him was impossible to ignore. He looked different standing there, not diminished, but clearer, as if something that had clouded his presence for days had finally lifted enough to let his true authority settle back into place. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the hall, calm and resonant, and the sound alone quieted the remaining murmurs. He did not ask Elena who she was, because he already knew her name, had known it the moment the connection formed, and that awareness passed between them in a glance that felt both startling and familiar. He acknowledged the healers first, not with reproach, but with a simple recognition of their effort, and that gesture shifted the room again, easing tension that had built from fear of blame. Then his focus returned to Elena, and the pause before he addressed her felt deliberate, respectful, as though he understood the importance of what he said next. Elena listened, her heart steady but alert, as he spoke of calm and balance, of how sometimes strength responded not to force or command, but to presence and understanding, and the words settled over the crowd like a truth they had not expected to hear from him. She did not bow or retreat when he finished, but inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his words without surrendering herself, and the choice felt instinctive, right. The Alpha King seemed to notice, a faint hint of approval passing through his expression before he turned to the council members gathered along the raised platform. Their faces reflected a range of reactions, from unease to cautious curiosity, because Elena's presence challenged assumptions they had never questioned. One of them stepped forward, voice measured, suggesting protocols and evaluations, careful words meant to regain structure, and Elena felt the familiar urge to fade, to let authority speak over her. Before she could act on it, the Alpha King lifted a hand, not sharply, but firmly, signaling a pause, and the gesture alone carried weight. He stated that Elena would not be tested or examined like a tool, that whatever had occurred was not something to be forced or repeated on demand, and the clarity of that boundary settled the matter in a way no argument could. Elena's breath caught briefly, surprise flickering through her calm, and she met his gaze again, gratitude warming her chest without overwhelming her focus. The hall shifted once more, this time toward acceptance, tentative but real, as wolves adjusted their understanding of who stood before them. Elena became acutely aware of her place at the center of it all, not elevated, not diminished, simply present, and the realization steadied her. As the Alpha King concluded the gathering, instructing the hall to stand down and allow rest to return to the space, Elena felt the moment close around her like a held breath finally released. She did not know what the next hours or days would bring, but she understood one thing with absolute clarity as she stepped back beside him, her path no longer leading into shadow. Whatever had awakened between them had already changed the course of her life, and the rejected Omega would not be overlooked again. The dispersal of the hall was quiet and orderly, yet Elena felt as though the space remained alive around her, watching, remembering, adjusting to a truth it could not unsee. As the crowd thinned, the echoes of footsteps softened, and the torchlight seemed less harsh, revealing details she had never noticed before, the carved symbols along the walls, the age-worn stones smoothed by generations of passing lives. She stood near the Alpha King, close enough to sense his presence without being overwhelmed by it, and the steadiness that radiated from him now felt earned rather than imposed. He turned slightly toward her as attendants moved at a respectful distance, and when he spoke, it was not as a ruler issuing instruction, but as a man seeking clarity. He asked how she had known what to do, and Elena considered the question carefully, because the answer mattered. She told him the truth, that she had not known in the way healers knew things, that she had simply listened to what was there instead of forcing it, to become something else. The words felt small compared to the weight of what had happened, yet he received them with quiet attention, as though they filled a space he had not known how to name. They walked together at a measured pace through a side corridor, stone cool beneath their feet, the distance from the hall granting a sense of privacy that Elena had rarely experienced. She was aware of the guards maintaining a respectful distance, their watchful eyes curious but restrained, and the realization that she was being protected rather than observed settled slowly into her awareness. The Alpha King spoke again, this time acknowledging the cost of being dismissed, of carrying a role that invited underestimation, and Elena felt the words resonate deeper than she expected. No one in authority had ever named that truth aloud before, and the recognition steadied her in a way praise never had. She found herself answering honestly, sharing that rejection had taught her patience and awareness, skills rarely valued but deeply necessary, and he listened without interruption. They paused near an open archway where cool night air drifted in, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant rain, and for a moment, the world felt remarkably balanced. The Alpha King looked out into the dark, then back to her, and said that whatever bond had formed between them would not be claimed or defined without her consent, that her autonomy mattered as much as his stability. The statement caught Elena off guard, not because she doubted his authority, but because the respect embedded in his words felt unfamiliar and powerful. She nodded, accepting the boundary he offered, and felt a subtle easing inside her chest, as if another old knot had loosened. They resumed walking, conversation shifting to quieter things, the state of the lands, the weight of leadership, the quiet responsibilities that rarely made it into stories. Elena listened, offering perspective where she could, not as an advisor, but as someone who understood what it meant to carry unseen burdens. By the time they reached the threshold of the inner chambers, the tension that had once defined the space felt distant, replaced by a cautious sense of possibility. The Alpha King paused there, thanking her not with grand gestures, but with sincerity that held its own weight, and Elena recognized that whatever lay ahead would be shaped by choices rather than fear. As she stepped away under escort, her path lit by steady torchlight, she realized that the rejected Omega had crossed an invisible line, not into privilege, but into acknowledgement, and the quiet strength she carried would no longer be overlooked. The night settled gently over the stronghold, and with it came a stillness Elena was not accustomed to, a quiet that did not press or judge, but simply existed. She was given a small chamber overlooking the inner courtyard, modest in size yet warm, its stone walls holding the day's remaining heat, and as she stood by the narrow window, she watched the moon rise slowly above the towers. The events of the hall replayed in her mind, not as spectacle, but as sensation, the steady calm beneath her hand, the shift in the Alpha King's presence, the way the world had tilted just enough to feel different. She rested her palms on the cool sill, grounding herself, reminding her body that the danger had passed, and that she was safe, truly safe, perhaps for the first time in her adult life. Footsteps approached outside the door, unhurried and familiar, and when the Alpha King entered with a respectful knock and pause, Elena felt no jolt of fear, only awareness. He did not cross the room immediately, instead remaining near the doorway, giving her space by instinct rather than protocol, and that choice spoke louder than any reassurance. He told her the night would be quiet now, that his rest had returned fully, and the words carried relief not just for himself, but for everyone who depended on his steadiness. Elena nodded, sensing the truth of it, feeling the echo of calm ripple outward like a pond finally undisturbed. He asked if she was comfortable, a simple question that held unexpected weight, and she answered honestly that she was, though she admitted the stillness felt unfamiliar. He acknowledged that change often felt that way, neither easy nor frightening, just new, and the understanding in his tone eased something tight within her. They spoke briefly of practical matters, of where she would stay, of the days ahead, and he made it clear that no decisions about her role would be made without her voice present. The certainty of that promise settled between them, solid and unyielding, and Elena realized she was being offered not protection alone, but partnership in choice. When he turned to leave, he paused, then said that the connection they shared would require patience, that balance was something maintained, not claimed, and she agreed, appreciating the honesty. After he left, Elena returned to the window, watching the moonlight trace pale paths across the courtyard stones, and she allowed herself a slow breath, feeling the quiet strength within her align with the calm of the night. Elsewhere in the stronghold, the Alpha King stood alone for a moment, resting a hand over his chest where her touch had steadied him, and he recognized that his power felt clearer now, not diminished by reliance, but refined by trust. He had ruled through command and endurance for so long that he had forgotten the value of shared presence, and tonight reminded him that leadership could be grounded as much in listening as in action. As the hours passed, the stronghold settled into rest, and Elena lay awake only briefly, her thoughts calm rather than racing, her sense of self expanding gently into a future she could not yet define. She understood that what lay ahead would require care, boundaries, and courage, but for the first time, she did not feel she would face it alone. In the quiet heart of the night, both Omega and King rested, balanced between what had been and what might become, their paths now undeniably linked by a calm strong enough to reshape destiny. Morning arrived without ceremony, the light slipping gently through the high windows of the stronghold, as if careful not to disturb what had been restored overnight. Elena woke, with a clarity she had never known, her thoughts calm, her body rested, and as she sat up, she realized that the quiet inside her had stayed. She dressed simply and stepped into the corridor, guided by attendants who treated her with a respectful neutrality that felt new, not reverent, not dismissive, just aware. Word had traveled through the stronghold by then, not as rumor, but as recognition, and though no one spoke openly, Elena sensed the shift in the way eyes followed her, curious rather than critical. In the council chamber, the Alpha King stood at the head of a long stone table, his posture relaxed yet grounded, and when he saw her, he inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her presence without spectacle. The council members gathered there appeared composed, but beneath their calm lay questions that pressed at the edges of the room, and Elena felt them before they were spoken. The Alpha King began by addressing the state of the realm, his voice steady, outlining the need for balance not only within himself, but across their lands, and his words carried an undertone of change. He then spoke of Elena, not elevating her above others, but recognizing her role as essential, and he stated plainly that what she had offered could not be replicated by force or command. The council listened, some with visible acceptance, others with measured caution, but none challenged him openly, because the calm that filled the room was undeniable evidence of his restored stability. Elena was invited to speak, not compelled, and she rose slowly, feeling the weight of the moment without being crushed by it. She did not describe what she had done in technical terms, because there were none that fit, but spoke instead of listening, of patience, of understanding the difference between silence and absence. Her voice carried clearly, unshaken, and she felt the truth of her words settle into the room like a foundation being laid. When she finished, the Alpha King confirmed that her presence would be voluntary, her choices respected, and that no one would claim authority over her beyond what she freely offered. The declaration marked a turning point, not only for Elena, but for the structure of the court itself, and the council formally acknowledged it, adapting protocols in real time to reflect the reality before them. As the meeting concluded, the Alpha King asked Elena to walk with him through the outer grounds, where sunlight warmed the stone paths and the scent of pine lingered in the air. There, away from walls and witnesses, he spoke more openly, admitting that her calm had reached a part of him long guarded, and that trusting it required humility he was still learning. Elena listened, neither diminishing his experience nor placing herself above it, and she answered that calm was something shared, not owned. They paused near the edge of the grounds, looking out over the land he was sworn to protect, and for a moment, the distance between ruler and rejected Omega felt irrelevant. The Alpha King acknowledged that destiny often arrived quietly, shaped by small choices rather than grand designs, and Elena felt the truth of it resonate deeply. As they returned toward the stronghold, she understood that recognition had finally found her, not as an exception or anomaly, but as herself, and the path ahead, though uncertain, felt grounded in respect rather than fear. The rejected Omega walked beside the Alpha King in the open light of morning, no longer unseen, her presence woven into the future of the realm. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm, one that neither rushed nor resisted the changes unfolding within the stronghold, and Elena found herself gradually woven into its daily life in ways she had never imagined. She was not placed on display nor hidden away, but given space to move freely, to observe, to contribute where she felt able, and that freedom became its own form of trust. Wolves greeted her with cautious respect, some with quiet warmth, others with uncertainty they did not try to mask, and Elena met them all with the same calm steadiness that had carried her through the hall. The Alpha King watched these interactions from a distance at first, noting how the presence of the rejected Omega altered the atmosphere around her, how tensions eased rather than escalated, how conversations softened instead of sharpening. It was not obedience she inspired, but balance, and he recognized its value immediately. When disputes arose among the council or between pack leaders who arrived seeking audience, Elena was not summoned as a solution, but invited to listen, and often that was enough to change the tone of the room. She learned the contours of leadership by observing him, the way he weighed words before speaking, the way he allowed silence to do work others rushed to fill, and she saw how his restored calm shaped every decision that followed. In turn, he learned from her patience, from the way she trusted time rather than force, and their mutual respect deepened without need for declaration. One afternoon, as the courtyard filled with filtered sunlight and the sound of distant voices, the Alpha King called a public assembly, not to announce a decree, but to acknowledge a truth that could no longer remain unspoken. Elena stood beside him, aware of every eye upon her, yet unburdened by the need to perform. He spoke of stability regained and of the quiet strength that made it possible, and when he named her role, it was not as savior or symbol, but as partner in balance, someone whose presence had reminded him of what leadership could be when grounded in empathy. The crowd listened, not stunned, but attentive, as though they had been waiting for words that matched what they already felt. He made it clear that Elena's place among them was not granted by rank, but earned through trust freely given, and that no one would challenge that without answering to him. The declaration was not dramatic, yet its impact rippled outward, reshaping how wolves saw both their king and the Omega at his side. Elena felt the shift as a release rather than a rise, a settling into alignment with who she had always been. After the assembly, as the stronghold returned to its steady hum, the Alpha King and Elena walked together along the inner wall, the late afternoon light casting long shadows that moved in quiet parallel. He asked her if she felt burdened by what had changed, and she considered the question honestly before answering that responsibility felt different when it was shared rather than imposed. He nodded, understanding the distinction, and admitted that he had once believed solitude was the cost of power, only to learn that isolation weakened what it was meant to protect. They stopped where the land stretched open beyond the walls, green and enduring, and Elena felt a sense of belonging settle within her, not tied to place, but to purpose. She was no longer defined by rejection or rarity, but by presence, and the Alpha King acknowledged it with a simple gesture, standing beside her, without need for claim. In that quiet moment, the future did not feel uncertain or overwhelming, but steady, shaped by choices rooted in respect, and Elena understood that the path ahead, though still unfolding, would be one she walked seen, valued, and whole. The season turned quietly, marked not by ceremony but by consistency, and Elena found that the strongest changes were often the ones that settled in without announcement. Life within the stronghold continued, steady and grounded, shaped by routines that now included her presence as something natural rather than novel. She moved through the halls with ease, greeted by familiar faces, her role no longer questioned, her value no longer measured against old assumptions. The Alpha King remained attentive without hovering, allowing space for both of them to grow into what they had become, and their shared calm formed a foundation that others began to mirror. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky softened into shades of gold and blue, he invited her to walk beyond the inner grounds, along a path overlooking the land that stretched for miles in every direction. The air was cool and clear, carrying the quiet sounds of the world settling into rest, and Elena felt a sense of completion settle alongside her awareness. They walked in silence for a time, not because there was nothing to say, but because words were unnecessary in the presence of understanding. The Alpha King eventually spoke, not as ruler, but as someone acknowledging a truth that had become impossible to deny. And he said that his wolf no longer strained against him, that it rested now, responsive rather than reactive, and that the change had reshaped how he understood strength. Elena listened, her steps measured, her gaze forward, and she recognized that what he was offering was not a claim, but a recognition of shared ground. She answered that calm was something she had learned to protect long before it was valued, and that she would continue to choose it, with or without acknowledgement. He accepted that answer with respect, and when he reached out, it was not to claim her hand, but to walk beside her, matching her pace, sharing the path rather than directing it. As they reached a rise overlooking the valley, the light fading into dusk, he stopped and faced her fully, his expression open and steady. He told her that destiny, when spoken of loudly, often missed the truth of how it worked, that it moved through choice and presence rather than command, and that what bound them was not obligation, but recognition freely given. Elena met his gaze without hesitation, feeling the quiet certainty that had guided her from the beginning, and she understood that whatever future unfolded would be shaped by mutual respect rather than fear or expectation. They stood there together as night settled in, the land peaceful beneath them, and Elena felt a sense of belonging that did not require surrender. The rejected Omega had become a woman seen clearly for who she was, not elevated above others, but grounded firmly within herself, and the Alpha King stood beside her not as savior or ruler alone, but as someone who had learned the power of listening. When they turned back toward the stronghold, their steps fell into easy rhythm, and Elena knew that her story would no longer be defined by what had been denied to her, but by what she had chosen to offer. In the quiet certainty of that truth, she walked forward, her presence steady, her future open, and the world around her finally in balance.